Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got in front of me here is the Winged Prime, and this dude here is really me proving a point. A question comes up quite regularly when I paint something like a Termagant or a Space Marine about how would this work by applying it to a larger miniature? How can I use these techniques to paint the heroes in my army? And I don't mean to sound flippant when I say paint them exactly the same way. We have a tendency, I think, to overthink when it comes to painting heroes or leaders because they stand out well enough on the table as it is. So what I've got here is the Winged Prime painted using almost exactly the same method as I did for the Termagants. There are one or two extra colors, not all that much, and one of them, the Leviathan purple you'll see, you can probably skip entirely. So as always, the recipe for this one, all the paints will be listed in the description below. Let's get started. Okay, now let me apologize in advance because keeping all of this dude in focus is going to be a little bit challenging. So if it does dip in and out a little bit as I'm moving him around, please bear with me. He's huge. Now once you have assembled him, the first thing to do of course is to prime him. Same as always, and I've used here the Army Painter's Matte White. You could just as easily use White Scar, Vallejo's White Rattle Can. It does not matter too much. It is a little bit tricky getting to every part of him. I found holding him upside down and spraying him from a few different angles was necessary. But once you've got a decent coverage, you should have something that looks like this. Now I'm not exaggerating when I point out that painting a larger Tyranid miniature is often almost exactly the same as painting the little fellas, and that's what I want to demonstrate. So, once he's primed, first thing to do is exactly the same as you would with the gaunts, and that is to grab some Magos Purple. So what I've got for this is quite a large brush. This is one of my little cheap ones from the stationery aisle, something big that's going to hold plenty of shade, or contrast in this case. And let me get into the recesses with a bit of work. So as you can see, I'll jam this quite firmly into some of these areas, because it's important we don't leave any little bits of white stuff hiding away there. Now try to work in areas, so I'm going to paint his whole wing first, and then start moving into his body and what have you, because you want to make sure that you're not splodging it across the whole thing and then leaving some areas to dry, where you're going to get ugly tide marks. So, away we go. This is not a particularly exciting part, but it is necessary. So, Magos Purple over the entire miniature. Now, the editing on this video is going to make that look almost instant. That's not a difficult stage, but it is a little time consuming, simply owing to the huge size of this miniature. Remember as well that you can flip them upside down to reach difficult spots. Anywhere that you still really struggle to reach, just swap to a slightly smaller brush and you'll be fine. Now speaking of swapping between brushes, I'm going to start by dry brushing most of the miniature. I've got a big makeup brush here, something nice and soft makes this really easy, and I'm going to use Pallid Witch Flesh over the entire miniature. I'm going to start first of all, keep pushing him off the side of the screen, I'll start by dry brushing his carapace, because we are going to do something else with this later, so if this is too bright, it won't matter. What I'm doing this for is to get an idea of what I'm leaving behind from my dry brush. And then once I'm satisfied with that, we can start dry brushing all of the bits that are going to be that awful, meaty, Tyranid sort of color. Yum. Yum, yum, yum. Now this likewise will take a little bit of work. But yeah, go around the whole miniature. I am going to need a smaller brush to get in right up into here. A common question is what to do about areas that you struggle to reach. And honestly, if you are really fighting to reach something, you can't get a brush in there, don't worry about it. It'll mean more often than not you're not going to see it on the table. Some people do get very cross when I suggest don't paint a thing, but do you want them done? Or do you want to enter Golden Demon? Because both are noble goals, but I am not going to win a Golden Demon anytime soon, so don't follow my advice to do that. Now in some areas you're going to want to come back and go over the same place a couple of times, particularly on the arms and the membranous parts of the wings. If you want to, you can go back over this now with a little bit of white to brighten it up even more. I don't think we're going to need to. Matter of personal choice, of course. You'll see on the backs of his wings, it's a little bit rough by comparison. It is a little bit difficult to dry brush up inside in the way that I normally do, but I'm not too worried because those bits are not ordinarily going to be seen. So, shh, don't tell anybody, and I won't either. What we'll move on to now is... Now, I always struggle saying this because to me it's sheesh purple. But I've heard it shyish purple or she-ish purple. You'll see it on screen, it's the dark purple. Now I use this one because I like it more than Leviathan purple. I generally prefer a darker finish on Tyranid carapace. But Leviathan purple is also quite nice, and I am going to use that later anyway. But for now, let's go around and most of these big carapace sections, I'm going to give a quick blast of sheesh, shewishish, shobadadub-dub-dub. This purple, and yes, I'm so brave, I can't even say it. We'll come back in a couple of minutes. And with most of that done, I'm going to pop a little bit of Leviathan purple on the softer scales on his chest here. I want these to look like they would be slightly lighter. Now with some Black Templar, I'm going to paint just a couple of details. Now the old Leviathan miniatures tended to have red claws and what have you. You've seen the finished product already, so you know that's what I'm going to do. But these sheathed parts here, I'm going to paint them similarly to how I did the weapon casings on the termagants to sort of tie those elements together. So I'm going to use Black Templar on these, and I'm also going to use it, you'll see I haven't painted in the whole horn up here, just a little bit of this up on that bit. Now I want just a little bit more depth of colour on the purple than I have on the termagants. So what I'm going to do, rather than going straight to the Warp Fiend Grey, I have here some Genestealer purple and another nice soft makeup brush. What I'll do is just flick along the edges of some of these areas of detail to brighten up some of the carapace. This won't show up immediately when you're looking at it up close, so do hold it out to arm's length now and then just to get a feel for how much you're actually leaving behind. Now the beautiful thing is, if you add too much of that, like I did, just grab yourself some fresh some of that purple, and you can paint it into the recesses and get a really easy graduation of colour. It's wonderful. But now I've got Warp Fiend Grey, and this here is the monster brush from the Army Painter. Something big and relatively soft that I don't mind knocking around a bit. And with this we are going to quite traditionally dry brush, just picking out the edges and emphasizing the harder points on the carapace. So I find flicking against the grain is the easiest way to pick that out. Now over the purple, that looks really cool. I'd also suggest a little bit of that on the black, just to blend it in and make it look a little bit more natural. What I'm going to do now is flip him upside down, so it's a little bit easier to reach the corners of his little wingerling bits. I've got Reikland Fleshade. Now this here is the old one, but the new is going to work in much the same way. It will not make an appreciable difference. And we're going to start painting over the membranes of his wings. Ugh. Well, this is nice and quick. It's really just a case of changing up the color a little bit. When you're applying this, you can chase it into the recesses if you're finding that it's settling on the flat bits a little too much. So do this on one side first, let it dry, and then flip them around and paint the other side of the wings. Now that looks sufficiently meaty and gross, but what I am going to do, and it is optional, but I figure we might as well because it's going to look cool. Grab yourself a nice soft dry brush. You'll notice that's a recurring theme at this point. And we're going to go back to Pallid Witch Flesh. What I'm going to do is lighter this time. Just dry brush along the membrane of the wings, looking to catch and highlight those edges. And it's important that you let that dry. I don't think I've let that dry properly, so whoopsie doodle. Don't worry too much if you do go over parts of the wings, the fingery bits again. And while you've got your Pallid Witch Flesh out, what I'd recommend is if you've got any bits on the face in particular that you want to tidy up, you can do that now. Just swap to a smaller brush, a little bit of water in your paint like normal. And once that has settled, we'll return to Reikland Fleshade, and we'll start from roughly halfway along that second joint, and just add a second layer of Reichland flesh shade. Now comes the part that I have actually been quite looking forward to. What I've got is Flesh Tearer's Red, and I'm going to paint his hooves, claws, and his tongue with this, although some of these bits I'm going to swap to a smaller brush for. So, starting from the top of any areas of detail, a little coat of this, and then just pull down to the tips of the claws, and that'll be the same through all of them. So, away we go. There's quite a few little stabby bits on this dude. We're into the home stretch now, and I'm actually really pleased with how the black sheathed claws turned out looking. I was a little worried it might look silly, but no, I like that. If you don't, of course, paint them how you like. What I've got now is Imperial Fist, and I am going to very carefully dot in what we can see of the eyes here. I'm doing this now because in a couple of seconds I'm going to bust out the white so I can tidy up if I make a mistake, which I already have on the other eye. Now we just need the tiniest dot of white scar. What I'm going to do is paint in around the eye socket here to brighten that up, and just a little bit on his teeth to make those stand out a wee bit more. Now from here there's just a couple of stages left that I'm going to do. First off, I have Carroburg Crimson, and some of these big prominent meaty bits, like on the limbs, I'm going to give a quick dose of this so that they look a little bit different to the carapace sort of stuff surrounding them, but without having to do anything complex painting-wise. You can also jam a little bit of this into these spiracles to make them stand out on the arms. And then finally, the last stage before we go ahead and varnish them is to apply one last dry brush. What I'm using this is Flayed One Flesh, and yeah, dry brushing red with a flesh tone gives you this awful meaty finish, which is proper cool for these claws. The brush I'm using, it's about the same size as a medium dry brush from Citadel, so don't worry too much about that. Now once I'm finished with this, what I'm going to do is give them a quick varnish and base them to match the Tyranids that I have already done. Let's get a look at this big boy once all of this is finally done. And there at last, our Winged Prime is complete, and I have to admit I enjoyed painting him a lot more than I thought I would. He's also really quick to do. Just by using the same methods as I have done for the Termagants, this guy only took me a couple of hours, and that's including drying times. And I just realized I've forgotten the little bits on the back of his heels with that Carroburg Crimson. Never mind, I'll fix that later. Now this method will work just as well also for your Screamer Killer and the Brain Bug. It occurs to me now that I've actually quite forgotten what the brain bug is actually called, so take my advice with a grain of salt. Now, I'd probably add something like Ethermatic Blue for the brain on the brain bug, but other than that, these same methods are going to work perfectly well, no matter what you're painting. Tyranids look different to one another as it is. You know, you're not going to struggle to see a large miniature like this on the table. So whereas with Space Marine captains and the like, you want to spend a little bit more time, maybe do it slightly differently, Tyranids, man, just grab the dry brush and knock them out. So as always, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much, each and every one. You guys make the difference. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.